Today's video, we reveal the most dumb deaths ever recorded, from a man who pulled out his own tooth with a string to save money, to another who thought a YouTube video made him a boat driver and paid for it in the worst way possible. It was October 6, 2016, at a residential home in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The house was tidy and well kept, the kind of property that showed no obvious signs of financial difficulty. It had been lived in for years and maintained without complaint. Nothing about the exterior suggested the kind of thinking that was happening inside it. Harold Green was 52, a warehouse supervisor who had worked the same position long enough to accumulate savings that most people in his income bracket did not have. He was not struggling. He was not in debt. Harold simply did not believe in spending money on things he thought he could handle himself, and healthcare fell squarely into that category. His family knew this about him. It was not a recent development. Over the years, he had ignored minor injuries, deferred routine checkups, and talked himself out of appointments that most people would have considered standard. The savings account grew. The medical visits did not happen. Sometime in the weeks before October 2016, one of Harold's teeth became visibly loose. It caused mild discomfort, but nothing that disrupted his daily routine. A dentist would have assessed it, confirmed the situation, and handled the extraction in a controlled clinical setting for a cost Harold could have covered without any meaningful impact on his finances. Harold did not make an appointment. He decided it was not worth paying for. Instead, he tied one end of a piece of string around the tooth and the other end around a door handle and pulled. The tooth came out. The bleeding was manageable. The socket healed over the following days without complication. Harold interpreted this as confirmation that he had made the right call. Shortly after, he noticed a second tooth that felt slightly different from the others. It was not visibly loose. There was no clear indication that it needed to come out. A dental examination would likely have found nothing requiring intervention, or at most, a minor issue addressable through non-invasive treatment. Harold did not seek that assessment. He applied the same logic he had used the first time. The first tooth had come out cleanly with a string and a door. This one would too. He tied the string, attached it to the door, and pulled. The tooth was stable. Removing a tooth that has not sufficiently loosened from its socket requires a degree of force that extraction of a genuinely loose tooth does not. The root was intact and anchored in the surrounding tissue and bone. When Harold forced the removal, the damage extended beyond the tooth itself. The wound left behind was deeper and more complex than the first, with torn tissue and disruption to the surrounding gum and bone structure. The bleeding was heavier and did not resolve quickly. Harold did nothing to treat the wound. He did not rinse it properly, did not seek any form of medical attention, and did not use anything beyond what he had at home. When the swelling began, he noted it and continued going about his routine. When the fever started, he attributed it to something unrelated. When the pain increased and he began having difficulty swallowing, he told his family he had already dealt with the problem himself and that there was nothing left to treat. The infection was not confined to the extraction site. An untreated open wound in the mouth, particularly one involving damage to deeper tissue, creates a direct pathway for bacteria to enter the bloodstream. Over the course of several days, Harold's condition worsened in a pattern consistent with systemic infection. The fever climbed. The swelling spread. He became difficult to rouse. His family, who had watched the situation develop and had urged him to go to a hospital more than once, eventually made the decision for him. By the time Harold Green arrived at the hospital, the infection had progressed into his bloodstream and the systemic response was advanced. Sepsis had developed from an untreated dental wound, a progression consistently preventable with timely intervention at any stage. Treatment was initiated, but the infection had become unresponsive. Harold Green died in the hospital. The cause of death was recorded as septicemia secondary to a traumatic dental extraction. Post-incident review confirmed the infection originated at the extraction site and advanced without medical intervention. His family later handled his estate. His savings, accumulated over decades and protected from any unnecessary expenditure, passed to his brother. It was May 17, 2015, at a house in Columbus, Ohio. The backyard was clean and tidy, The next day was Daniel Harper's daughter's first birthday party, and the backyard was where the party was going to be held. That was why the grass had to be cut that afternoon. Daniel Harper was 34, a sales manager with no professional landscaping background. He was comfortable with basic yard work and had owned a lawnmower for several years. Earlier that spring, he had purchased a new model, an upgrade from his previous machine with a different control layout and updated safety features he had not yet familiarized himself with. The manual had come in the box and remained unread. His daughter was turning 1 year old the next morning. Guests were expected, and the backyard needed to be ready. That was the pressure behind the afternoon. On the afternoon of May 17th, Daniel and his wife spent approximately 40 minutes in an argument centered on a single question: whether he should read the instruction manual before using the new mower for the first time. His wife's position was that the machine was different enough from his previous one to warrant at least a basic review of the controls. Daniel's position was that his prior experience with lawn equipment was sufficient, and that reading instructions for a lawnmower was unnecessary. The argument ended without resolution. Daniel went into the backyard and began mowing. The yard was mostly flat but had a few rough spots. There was a raised root near the back fence, a small dip on one side, and some fallen branches lying around. None of that would have been a problem if Daniel had known how his new mower worked, but he did not know. He was using a machine he had never read about, in a yard he had not fully cleared. At some point, the mower hit something and got stuck under the deck. Daniel reached underneath to clear it. Daniel thought he had turned the blade off before reaching under. He had not. He held down the safety bar with one hand and reached under the deck with the other. The blade was still spinning. The blade struck Daniel's right hand and passed through the soft tissue, tendons, and bone of multiple fingers in a fraction of a second. The force of the impact caused traumatic amputation of several fingers, with deep lacerations extending into the wrist and damaging major blood vessels. His wife had gone back inside the house, leaving Daniel alone in the yard. There was no tourniquet applied. There was nothing to slow what was happening. He collapsed on the grass as the mower continued running beside him. A neighbor heard the mower running continuously for an extended period, without any movement or change in sound. It did not sound right. He came over to check and found Daniel lying on the ground, not moving. By the time he was found, he had already lost a critical amount of blood. The neighbor called emergency services straight away. Daniel Harper was pronounced dead at the scene. His wife came outside shortly after and was present as responders confirmed his death. After the incident, investigators confirmed that the blade had still been moving when contact happened. They found that the safety controls on the new mower worked differently from older models, meaning the blade had not been fully disengaged at the time of contact, something clearly outlined in the instruction manual. Investigators also noted that residential mower blades can spin at around 3,000 rotations per minute, fast enough to cause catastrophic injury within a fraction of a second. The manual was found inside the house, still sealed in the manufacturer's packaging. The mower was recovered near the back fence in a section of the yard that had already been cut. It was March 9th, 2017, in a residential compound on the outskirts of Ibadan, Oyo State, Nigeria. The neighborhood was a dense arrangement of family homes and shared boundary walls, where properties sat close together and daily life spilled across front yards and open gates. Ben Adebayo was 19 and worked as a roadside mechanic's apprentice at a workshop not far from the compound. His brother Eric was 17 and was in his final year at a nearby secondary school, preparing for his examinations later that year. The two lived nearby and had developed a habit of climbing over the neighbor's perimeter fence to take fruit from trees growing inside the compound. The activity had been going on long enough that it was no longer treated as an occasional thing. The neighbor had issued warnings more than once. Access had been denied repeatedly and directly. The brothers continued regardless. The compound belonged to a retired lecturer who had spent over 3 decades teaching civil engineering at one of the oldest and most respected universities in the country. After his retirement, he had made the decision to leave the university environment and return to his hometown in Ibadan, where he had built and maintained the compound as a place to live quietly in his later years. He was known in the neighborhood as a reserved and orderly man who kept his property well and expected the boundary between his space and the surrounding area to be respected. At some point, The professor made the decision to wire the perimeter fence to a live electrical line. The connection was not done by a qualified electrician, and the installation was unstable from the start. In the first days after the modification, the current was intermittent and the fence did not carry a consistent charge. During that period, one of the brothers touched the fence and felt nothing. The two took this as confirmation that the electrification had not worked or had been removed. They had no reason to think otherwise based on what they had experienced. Several days passed. During that time, the connection began making consistent contact, and the fence started carrying continuous mains current without any visible change to its appearance. On the morning of March 9th, the brothers returned to the compound boundary, intending to climb over as they had done before. There was a brief argument between them about whether the fence might now be active. The prior experience of touching it without consequence settled the question in their minds. Ben reached out and gripped the fence with his hand. Both brothers were barefoot and standing on soil that had retained moisture from recent rain. The ground contact was direct and complete. The fence was carrying live current. The moment Ben gripped the metal, the circuit closed through his body and into the earth. At mains voltage, involuntary muscle contraction sets in immediately and prevents the person from releasing their grip. Ben could not let go. Eric moved forward without hesitation to pull his brother away. The moment he made contact with Ben, he became part of the same electrical circuit. Current passed through both of them simultaneously. Neither was able to disengage. Sustained exposure at that voltage causes cardiac arrhythmia and respiratory failure within a short window. Both remained in contact with the fence until the current was cut, after which they collapsed at its base. Residents in the compound noticed something was wrong and came out. It took some time before someone identified the source and cut power from the line. Emergency responders were contacted and arrived at the scene. Ben Adebayo was pronounced dead at the fence. Eric Adebayo was pronounced dead shortly after responders arrived. The investigation that followed identified the electrical connection as an improvised installation that did not meet any standard of safe practice. The wiring method was found to be dangerous, and the absence of any warning marking on the fence meant that nothing indicated the modification had been made. The neighbor's installation was classified as an illegal and unsafe use of electrical current on a boundary structure. It was April 22, 2016, at a residential home in Houston, Texas. The house was a single-story structure with a shingled roof, the kind of property that required occasional maintenance but nothing beyond what a reasonably handy homeowner could manage. The morning had started with light cloud cover, but by mid-morning, the forecast was calling for heavier rain later in the day. Calvin Brooks was 46, an HVAC technician who had spent his working life around residential and commercial buildings. He was comfortable with basic home repairs and had the kind of practical confidence that comes from years of working with tools and equipment in demanding environments. He was not inexperienced. He was not careless in his professional life. He simply had a habit at home of letting things wait. The roof leak had started during the previous rainy season. Water was getting through somewhere along the shingle line and working its way into the attic and down to the ceiling below. The interior damage was visible and had been visible for months. Calvin had identified the problem and knew how to fix it, but the repair was not done. Over time, the ceiling stain spread and the roof remained unchanged. On the morning of April 22nd, Calvin checked the weather and saw rain in the afternoon forecast. The light drizzle already in the air had not yet amounted to anything significant. He made the decision, at that moment, to get onto the roof and address the leak before the heavier rain arrived. The roof surface was already slightly wet. He retrieved his ladder, leaned it against the side of the house, gathered his basic tools, and climbed up. The repair area was along the upper section of the roof where the shingle damage had allowed water to penetrate. Calvin located the problem and began working. The drizzle continued at a light level for a short time, and then increased sooner than expected. Within a short period, the roof surface had gone from slightly damp to noticeably slick. The shingled surface, which provides reasonable traction under dry conditions, loses grip quickly when wet, and Calvin was moving across it in standard footwear without any non-slip provision. At some point, he recognized that the conditions had become worse than he had anticipated when he climbed up. The sensible response at that point would have been to come down immediately while the rain was still manageable. Calvin chose to wait on the roof for the rain to ease before attempting the descent. The rain did not ease, It continued, and the surface continued to deteriorate. The ladder below, which had been positioned on ground that was already soft from the morning drizzle, had shifted slightly as the soil beneath it absorbed more moisture and the footing became less stable. When Calvin decided to come down, he was working with a wet roof surface behind him, wet ladder rungs in front of him, wet footwear, and a ladder base that was no longer as firmly positioned as it had been when he went up. The combination of reduced traction on the rungs and the instability at the base of the ladder meant that the margin for error during descent was significantly smaller than it would have been under dry conditions. At some point during the climb down, footing was lost. The fall was from ladder height against the side of a single-story structure. Calvin came down near the base of the ladder and remained unresponsive. A family member found him unresponsive near the foot of the ladder shortly after the fall. The ladder was still leaning against the house. He had fallen at an awkward angle and sustained a head impact on the hard ground surface. Emergency services were contacted and responded to the scene. Calvin Brooks was pronounced dead from severe blunt force injuries sustained in the fall. The roof leak had been a known issue for months, and the repair had been attempted during active rainfall. After the incident, the home was left to his family, and the damage was later repaired. It was July 12, 2016, along a narrow channel of the Mekong River in Vietnam. The waterway ran close to a small private dock where local residents kept flat-bottom boats used for short trips between the bank and nearby points along the river. Marcus Doyle was 31, an American delivery driver living in the region at the time of the incident. He had no prior experience operating any kind of watercraft. He was comfortable on land, confident in his ability to learn practical tasks quickly, and had a habit of reasoning by analogy, which worked well enough in most situations he encountered. Boats, in his assessment, were not fundamentally different from other vehicles he had operated. The steering was mechanical, the throttle was straightforward, and the basic principle of moving from one point to another was the same, regardless of the surface beneath you. His neighbor kept a small John boat-style flat-bottom vessel at the dock and used it regularly for short trips along the channel. In the days before July 12th, Marcus approached the neighbor and asked about using the boat. The neighbor, who had no particular reason to be suspicious, asked whether Marcus had experience with boats. Marcus said he did. He told the neighbor he had watched videos and that operating a flat-bottom vessel in a calm channel was essentially the same as driving a car. The neighbor accepted this and made no further inquiry. Marcus was given access to the boat. Marcus had no experience operating a boat and treated it the same way he would a car. Steering involved delay, and the vessel continued moving after input. Balance shifted with the movement of the water. The flat-bottom boat was stable in calm conditions but sensitive to side waves in the narrow channel. These factors were not accounted for when he left the dock. The initial portion of the trip went without incident. At low speed, before any significant wake reached him, the boat responded in a way that matched his expectations. The throttle produced forward movement, the steering responded, and nothing in those first minutes contradicted his assumption that the operation was manageable. His confidence increased. A larger vessel passed through the channel. The wake moved through the narrow waterway and amplified as it reflected off the banks and overlapped with existing surface movement. The waves reached Marcus at an angle to the side of the flat-bottom hull. The first wave struck the side of the boat and shifted its balance. Marcus reacted by turning, but the delayed response of the steering caused the boat to continue drifting sideways into the next wave. As the second wave hit, the boat tilted further. Water entered over the side, and the sudden weight shift destabilized the hull. The boat rolled and capsized into the channel. Marcus was thrown into the water. With no prior experience and no flotation device, he struggled to orient himself in the current and surface movement created by the passing wake. The confined channel and continued wave action made it difficult to regain control. Within a short period, he submerged and did not resurface. Nearby residents noticed the overturned boat and alerted others in the area. Local responders were contacted and a search was initiated. Marcus Doyle was recovered from the water and transported to a nearby hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The cause of death was recorded as drowning. After the incident, the boat was recovered from the channel with minor structural damage. The owner reported that it had been returned to the dock after basic repairs. No further use was granted to others following the incident.